Well, we are about either 4 weeks or 4 years into the Trump administration. I can't quite figure it out. It's an emotional roller coaster. And to unpack the insanity, the fascism, the dishonesty from the second administration, I thought I'd bring in an expert, perhaps the most vociferous critic of the Trump administration, Mehdi Hasan, founder of Zeteo, which is like a 660,000 YouTube subscribers. Man, I just reached 500,000. You are leaping ahead. Congratulations, Mehdi. How are you?
Thank you very much. Congratulations, 2.5 million. It's great to have some presence in on YouTube, on Substack, online. For far too long, the right have owned a lot of online news spaces.
Yeah, I know. When we last spoke, I mean, Zateo's gone on for what is it? Has it even reached its year anniversary?
No, nearly. We're coming up to it. We're about
Nearly.
nine.
Yeah, I mean, like you guys have made significant strides. The talent you've recruited, Bassem Youssef, Francesca Fiorentini, our mutual friend Wajah Ali. I still think you should also try to poach James O'Brien from the United
Okay.
Kingdom. Between you all, you would all be
Thanks,
unstoppable.
Bill.
But are you surprised at how well Zateo has done so quickly?
I mean, I'm surprised that I'm positively surprised that we had such support from the get-go. As we approach our first anniversary, we're looking at kind of people's 1 year subscriptions coming to an end and hoping they renew. But we had such momentum and such a surge when we launched. I think people really wanted to support an alternative to corporate media. I had left MSNBC. There was the war raging in Gaza. There was the return of Trump that was looking clearer and clearer. And I think people really, I identified as a business person. I'm a journalist all my life. I just became a business person in the last 12 months. I identified a gap in the market that I believe was there, and it was there. People are craving an alternative to what is on their cable screens, what is in their newspapers, and especially now with Trump elected and the mainstream media rolling over, as you and I have both documented, bending the knee in advance. I think that makes independent journalism even more important, especially on YouTube.
One of the things, the encouraging signs, I'm just wondering if you caught it, but Midas Touch, the liberal podcast Midas
Yeah,
Touch, actually
sure.
leaped ahead of the Joe Rogan
Yeah.
Experience. Do
Congratulations
you
to
think
Ben
that
and the
that's a
team.
blip, or do you think that that could be an indicator of what's to come under the second Trump administration?
I mean, I think there's arguments for both sides. I guess that the critics would say, well, it's because people are very frustrated with Trump right now. We're in the Trump 100 days. The hashtag liberal resistance, are coming back in terms of, there was a lot of PTSD after the election. A lot of people, we had people canceling subscriptions from Zeteo saying, look, we love your stuff, but we can't read the news anymore. We're just too depressed. We want to kind of sit this one out. There wasn't a woman's march at 2017 style energy this time round. A lot of people were just subdued, just feeling beaten down. So for the Midas Touch folks to do so well, I think people are getting angrier now. We're now seeing, and I was confident. I said this, and our mutual friend Wajad said this, that look, people will come around once they see what Trump is doing, once they're reminded of how crazy he is, and he's much crazier second term than he is term one, much more extreme term two than he is term one. Then yes, naturally, public anger, public revulsion, public reaction will be there. And those of us who are in progressive spaces will be able to take advantage and say, look, A, we warned you, but B, this is our content. We're the ones who are covering what Doge is doing, who are covering the austerity in the cards, covering the introduction of, white supremacists and white supremacist aligned groups into government. All of that stuff needs to be reported on and covered, and people need media for that.
Yeah, I'm hoping that this is a sign of a shift that we're breaking the right wing stranglehold on alternative media, because I'm of the opinion, given the colossal advantages institutionally that the right enjoys and Trump seems keen on exploiting, the only way that we will remain competitive in elections is if we have, just an unapologetically progressive, or at the very least liberal media that will call this shit out. I'm curious, I saw a David Pakman video actually this morning that kept me up. I had a hard time falling back asleep because in it, Pakman says that he spoke with some attorneys in D.C. who have effectively warned him that they're convinced that Trump will attempt to go after the David Pakman Show, Brian Tyler Cohen, Pondering Politics, Mehdi Hasan, and Zeteo. Has that crossed your mind?
Oh, 100%. I mean, this is one of the things some of us were warning about last year when people were saying, well, Trump, we survived Trump once, we'll survive him again. No, no, it's a very different Trump administration coming. This is an administration coming in filled with a desire for vengeance, filled with grievances, filled with an appetite for what they believe is revenge because they believe they were wronged or targeted or whatever nonsense. And very much without any guardrails, term one guardrails of adults in the room, your John Kellys and your Jim Mattises and your Rex Tillersons, they're all gone. The courts, well, Trump controls a lot more of the courts, including the Supreme Court, than he did term one. And yes, they have always looked at the autocratic playbook, and the autocratic playbook requires taking on the media and taking over the media. Look at Narendra Modi in India, look at Viktor Orban in Hungary, look at Vladimir Putin in Russia, look at even Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. This is the playbook, right? And they've already managed to kind of intimidate a lot of media organizations with the threat of lawsuits. It helps that Trump now has as his wingman, the richest man in the world, who's happy to sue Media Matters for America in a Texas courtroom, go judge shopping. Trump himself has sued ABC News and got them to settle ridiculously when George Stephanopoulos did nothing wrong. Libel law would have protected him. Had they gone to court, but ABC decided to pay out. We know that 60 Minutes, or the owners of 60 Minutes, Paramount, are looking to pay out to Trump to settle another frivolous lawsuit where Trump didn't like the way they edited a 60 Minutes interview, so he sues them. Who knows what will happen with the Pulitzer Board, who he's also suing frivolously. This is a real problem, right? People are worrying about, I know of many media organizations that worried about calling what Elon Musk did a Nazi salute because they don't want to get sued by Elon Musk. So that's chilling free speech. And then, yes, as you mentioned, as David Pack mentions, there is the actual targeting of media organizations. We have a new chair of the FCC, Brendan Carr, who's already writing letters to media organizations warning them about their content. I think he's opened an investigation into a local radio station in Northern California about their ICE raids, their coverage of ICE, which is normally outside the purview of the Federal Communications Commission. They shouldn't be looking at your content. We've had Associated Press kicked out of White House events because they don't use language that the government wants. So much for the First Amendment. And look, we know that Elon Musk has called for the jailing of journalists. I got into a back and forth with the vice president, weirdly, on Twitter, who obviously had nothing to do with his time on Monday, talking about this very issue, where Vance is going to Europe and lecturing the Europeans on freedom and free press and free speech. Meanwhile, on the same day as JD Vance and I are going back and forth on Twitter, Elon Musk is on Twitter saying, there should be a long prison sentence for 60 Minutes journalists. Donald Trump called for the firing of Eugene Robinson. Last year, Trump himself said that the Politico journalist who broke the Dobbs story should be imprisoned. So this is, third world dictatorship stuff, we would say back in the day. This is what's coming to the United States.
I guess my follow-up is, are you looking forward to your audit? Because I am as well.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about, again, this is the playbook. In India, when the BBC, massive global respected media organization, not just, not some YouTuber or podcaster or independent media outlet, big old BBC did a documentary on Modi, critical documentary. What did the Modi government do? Within a few days, few weeks, there was a raid by the tax police on the BBC headquarters in New Delhi, right? This is the playbook. We know that Jim Comey and others said that they believe they were targeted for audit. It's funny now because, the Republicans love taking everything that they're accused of and turning it around. Every accusation is a confession. You have Pete Hegseth claiming that he was politically audited by the Biden administration with no evidence whatsoever. Meanwhile, we have actual testimony from people saying Trump called for audits into his enemies. I think they're going to use all sorts of levers, the SEC, the FTC, IRS. All of that stuff will be available to them. And this is what some of us tried to warn to no avail in 2024, that this is not going to be a normal administration anyway. This will be autocratic. This will be fascistic. This will be authoritarian. And good luck to those of us in the free press who are trying to stay free.
Yeah, so we're definitely going to get into your exchange with the vice president, because that was just, I have so many thoughts about it. I imagine you do too. I appreciate you identifying Brendan Carr at the FCC as a real problem, because with all of the deluge of shit coming from the Trump administration, I think that one in some ways is perhaps among the most sinister and the most dangerous, and is flying right under the radar. This is a MAGA troll. He's a Project 2025 author. He's delighting, because he's being called out for this selective weaponization, and he's just mocking people about it on social media. He resurrected claims that were dismissed under the Biden administration FCC against CBS, NBC, ABC. And they also dismissed claims. Exactly. They also dismissed claims against Fox, but he was content to set that aside. No, we're not going to keep that. We're not going to resurrect that one, even though they uniquely had to pay $800 million in a defamation settlement. Next time you're on Piers Morgan and he tries to hit you with the ABC thing, like, well, $15 million settlement from ABC compared to your buddies at Fox having to pay $800 million. They're just objectively worse by your own metric. So let's talk about the situation with the vice president. Honestly, I think you did him a solid, because that's probably the most amount of attention he's gotten here lately.
Yes, he disappeared since the election because the real vice president is Donald Trump and the real president is Elon Musk. We don't know what to even call JD Vance.
Yeah, so I'm curious about that. Number one, what do you think it is between the fact that he seems invisible in this administration and the fact that Trump just came out and said, no, I don't see him as my successor.
Yeah.
Do you think that's an indictment of their relationship, or do you think that it's actually stable and he just never perceived JD Vance to be a partner? Like, is this like another Mike Pence situation, I guess is my question.
I mean, look, first of all, Donald Trump is loyal to no one but himself, right? Whether you're a friend, colleague, family member, he will throw you under the bus when the time comes. And if that means letting a violent mob come and trying to hang you from a gallows, that's fine with him too. We know from the January 6th Commission and other people that, when he was told this could get Mike Pence killed, he said, so what? They want to hang him. Maybe he deserved it. Whatever. I'm paraphrasing Trump's words from the time. So he's not loyal to anyone. With Vance, I suspect he got annoyed during the election campaign that Vance did so badly. If you remember, he was polling worse than any vice presidential running mate since Sarah Palin. He was kind of foisted on the campaign by Don Jr., who's friends with JD Vance, and Peter Thiel, who has funded JD Vance's career, the libertarian billionaire. And I think that at some point Trump probably was annoyed at him because Trump is all about ratings, clicks, popularity, polls, and Vance wasn't really bringing much to the ticket. And had they lost, by the way, and we could always play the counterfactual game. He won by 1.5%. If a couple of 100,000 votes had gone a different direction in those 3 swing states in the Rust Belt, Kamala Harris would be president. We would all be talking about the Republican Party autopsy. Where did they go wrong? Why did they allow Trump to run again? And the Vance discussion would be part of it. Why did he pick JD Vance as his running mate, not someone more popular or appealing to people, and not someone who was so weird and got all the childless cat lady misogyny out there? So I don't think he has any particular fondness for Vance. I was surprised that he came out so bluntly in his first month as president, say he's not my successor, which I think a lot of MAGA folks will be delighted to hear because they want an open race. Although we're speaking the day after Donald Trump said he wants to run for a 3rd term, probably. So he doesn't need a successor, right? You've also got to think through that prism. They are deadly serious about trying to find a way for him to be president for another 4 years, right? People who think this is nonsense, who laugh and say, oh, Mehdi, hyperbole. No. They're very clear about this. They don't joke about this stuff. It's not a joke. Steve Bannon has made it very clear that he's going to spend the next few years trying to find a legal way to get right-wing judges to come on board for a novel reinterpretation of the Constitution that allows Trump to be president one more time. By the way, if they do that, if they do say you can run again as a president, what's to stop Barack Obama from running again against Trump? We'd all want to see that race.
I think President Obama is probably right now salivating at the prospect, like, let me just kick this ass.
Probably not, actually. Probably Michelle probably doesn't want him to run ever again. But anyways, that would be an intriguing race. But I would say this, look, he doesn't care about Vance. Vance doesn't do very much in this administration, doesn't have much power or influence. This is not a Dick Cheney vice president who's kind of has huge executive power.
Well, he is a dick, Mehdi. I would say that they share that he is a dick. That's probably the only comparison. Yeah.
The president, vice president are Trump and Musk, depending on which day of the week it is. One of them is president, one is vice president. But they are the guys in charge. Vance is not. Vance is busy trolling people on Twitter. Coming into my replies on a Monday. You're the vice president of the United States. Interesting that you have time to drop by to basically gaslight us about the state of a free press. I mean, what I had tweeted at him, and I did initiate it, to be fair, I quote tweeted 2 stories about the free press. As I was watching all the Munich coverage, this Vance hypocritical speech lecture in the Europeans, I sent 2 tweets to JD Vance. Quotes. One was, have you seen what Elon Musk is saying about locking up journalists? The second was, what about the AP being blocked from a briefing room? He responded to the second, because of course he did. You can't respond to the first. There's no defense for saying journalists should go to prison. So he ignored that one. But he cynically came into my replies to say, oh, you dummy, which is a very weird choice of words of insults. You dummy. There's a difference between blocking someone from the White House press briefing room and locking someone up in prison, as they do in Europe, he claims. One is a breach of free speech, one isn't. Now, really interesting, that response. Number one, the personal invective. Can you imagine if Kamala Harris had gone into the replies of a well-known conservative journalist? And
Texas
said,
would be
dummy.
seceding from the union, Mehdi.
It would be the end of the world. It would all be, oh my God, look how unpresidential, unvice presidential this is. Oh my God, what a weird thing to do. How attack on the free press, whatever. So number one, just what they get away with. Number two, he ignores the like-for-like comparison, which is Musk saying lock up journalists and him saying Europeans are locking up journalists. He ignores that one conveniently to do his little dig, and the right-wing media was like, oh, what an own from Vance. Okay. And number three, even on the substance of the tweet he responded to, actually, it is a free speech violation to remove AP from the briefing room. It's not that any media organization has a right to a seat in the briefing room. No, of course not. The free speech violation, the First Amendment violation, is that they kicked the AP out because they didn't like what the AP said. Right? It was because the AP say Gulf of Mexico, like most Americans, most of the world, not Gulf of America, that they were kicked out. They were punished for speech. That's the First Amendment violation. So it's very easy for them to kind of brush this stuff away. But we know they're doing this more and more. Donald Trump called, how is it not a bigger story? I would argue 99% of Americans do not know that Donald Trump, since becoming president, called for the Washington Post to fire a Pulitzer Prize winning veteran columnist, a black man named Eugene Robinson. The president of the United States said he should be fired over a column. Again, we've normalized this bullshit so much that you just have to stop and think, if Obama had done this or Bill Clinton had done this or George W. Bush, it would have been the biggest scandal for days.
Yeah,
with Trump, it's like, yeah, he's calling people to be fired. It's normal.
It's really frustrating because, it's one of the things that I think that you and I and others have to get used to is that their shamelessness is their superpower. I think, exactly. And I genuinely believe, I've proffered this argument before, I think there's a faction within MAGA that actually not only will employ hypocrisy, but actually delights in the hypocrisy. Yes. I think there's like a wink and a nod. I think even Piers Morgan, quite frankly, is guilty of this too, where he's smart enough to know that he employs double standards. And I think they like the permission structure of employing double standard, knowing that it pisses you off and pisses me off, because we know if the shoe was on the other foot. Again, I always use the example in my videos. If this is the logic, then President Biden would have been well within his rights to direct the FCC or the DOJ under the Biden administration to go after Fox the moment they paid that defamation settlement to Dominion Voting Systems. Clearly, you all are peerlessly incredible, peerlessly dishonest, peerlessly partisan, but we would have had a civil war if that happened.
But hold on, but just to take about the Civil War, let me just push back a little and say, isn't this an indictment of the Democratic Party and of Biden and of Obama and of Bill Clinton? That actually what we're discovering now, some of us knew this, but what others are discovering is that all this power was there for the taking and deploying. Democrats chose not to do this. When you say, oh, Biden could have done this, no, it would have been very legitimate for Biden to do this. People do the whole both sides and, you do this and they'll do that. Actually, no, there are objective standards. Just because Joe Biden does something doesn't mean Trump gets to do it in response. We're not in the playground, right? Joe Biden would have been well within his bounds of looking at Fox's licenses and saying the FCC should investigate a company that just settled an $800 million lawsuit for lying about an election which led to violence in the Capitol, right? He would have been he didn't do it. Meanwhile, that doesn't mean that Trump gets to come in and go, oh, well, I'm going to do it for, the spurious shit about CBS 60 Minutes editing a package. Like, they're not the same thing. I always think of, I don't know if you're a Friends fan. I grew up at a time when Friends, there's a great scene in Friends where I think Chandler steals Joey's couch or cushion, and Joey goes and wears all of Chandler's clothes. And there's a great line. He goes, that's not the same thing, Joey. And I always feel like that logic to Joey Tribbiani should be employed in our politics, right? It is not the same thing to say, well, we're going to go after X because you investigated the president for stealing documents. But the president committed a crime. That doesn't mean you get to do spurious investigations in response. They're not the same thing.
No, 100%. Like, there's this idea of a false equivalence, which is, okay, yes, if you ever investigate a Republican, you're somehow morally obligated to investigate a Democrat. Yeah, well, no, and unfortunately, I actually think the Biden administration could probably be accused of such a thing because they went after as many Democrats, corrupt Democrats like Bob Menendez.
More Democrats, you could argue.
Exactly.
They actually got convictions for Menendez and others and Hunter Biden. They didn't for Trump.
And then you look at even the investigation of Eric Adams, obviously, the argument's been made that is probably the greatest act of singular DOJ corruption that we've seen since the Watergate era. And you have Governor Kathy Hochul, a Democrat, saying, oh, I'm not going to avail myself of my constitutional right to remove Eric Adams, even though he's a liability. It's not just that she disagrees with him. He is clearly being extorted by the Republican Party. He is a liability.
Asked to give a comment on, he says, people of New York will decide. I mean, I'm sorry. The Democrats right now, we have feckless people running the Democratic Party.
Wait, you're not super supportive of Jerry Connolly as the House Oversight Chairman instead of AOC?
No Hakeem Jeffries, no Chuck Schumer, no Kathy Hochul, none of them.
Yeah, it really is. It's disappointing, especially when we have a bench as deep as we do. AOC, Jasmine Crockett, Jared Moskowitz, even in terms of like rhetoric. There's so many people out there who have the fight and the fire in them, and we're just passing them up. Jamie Raskin. I mean, yeah, this is a guy who is a constitutional scholar. He is a powerhouse now on the Judiciary Committee, and instead we seem rudderless. I'm curious, though.
You're not a fan of Hakeem Jeffries rolling out Captain Chaos as a Democratic attack line on Donald Trump? That doesn't fill you with inspiration and awe?
No, but I will say compared to Chuck Schumer, when he says, the people are aroused, and he has his glasses down to here, more aroused than anything, it's just so painful. I'm curious, though, like, we've seen, you mentioned polling earlier, all the way back at the first part of the conversation. It seems to me that Donald Trump's honeymoon period is grinding to a halt, which again, Republican apologists overstated the extent of the honeymoon in the first place. He's still very unpopular. He won with a plurality, not a majority. All the things that you've articulated in previous debates. What do you want to see from the Democratic Party now? Because I'll play the devil's advocate. I'll say, Mehdi, there's nothing that the Democrats can do to bring the Trump agenda to a total halt, right? They don't have the numbers to take control of the House of Representatives. Reconciliation in the Senate that just requires a 51, seat majority. They're very limited in what they can do. What would you push back on?
So a few things. Well, one is, let me do a shameless plug for Zeteo. Ezra Levin and Leah Greenberg, his wife, from Indivisible, wrote a great piece for us about what Democrats in the Senate can do, right? It's a horrible place, the Senate, a tortuous place filled with weird rules, regulations, protocols. There's actually a lot of things the Democrats can do to gum up the system. Unanimous consent is, for example, a device that is used by the Senate to get stuff done on a daily basis. You can stop that. I also find it ironic, by the way, you mentioned Democrats. We shouldn't just generalize, right? As you say, there are some Democrats who are fighting the good fight. Jasmine Crockett, AOC, Chris Murphy in the Senate, Brian Schatz. But then you look at someone like Jackie Rosen from Nevada, who went on CNN and said, well, we don't have a majority, so we can't do anything. Jackie Rosen keeps voting for Republican cabinet members. I think she's voted for 7 of them. Well, Jackie Rosen, you personally could do something. Just symbolically, you could not vote for crazy people or even non-crazy people to join a crazy administration. This idea that you go along, and this has been happening since Inauguration Day, right? When Amy Klobuchar opened up the ceremonies, stood giggling while Trump signed his first set of executive orders. And they would say, what the devil's advocate would say, well, those are the norms. You have to do this for the sake of democracy. Bullshit. You don't have to do anything. This guy didn't even turn up to the last inauguration, right? You guys did not have to be part of all this and normalize them. Every single time they vote for a nominee, every single time they vote for anything that keeps the process moving, you are normalizing an abnormal presidency. And you are undermining any argument, which is what they did last year, right? They went into it saying fascist, Hitler, all the stuff that actually I agree with. This is what really annoys me. I'm one of those people who does think Trump is an autocratic threat to democracy. But were Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and some of these Senate Democrats the right messages? Of course not. Was Barack Obama yucking it up with Trump at the funeral of Jimmy Carter weeks after, he was calling him a fascist? They really, really undermine themselves, the Democrats. And when people say they don't have leverage, they don't have power, even if that's true, don't fucking say it out loud. I mean, did Mitch McConnell go around? I don't remember. Show me the clips of Mitch McConnell in 20, whatever it was, in the Obama period saying, well, we don't have any leverage. We can't stop Barack Obama. Don't ask us to stop Barack Obama. No, he said, I'm going to make him a one-term president. I'm going to stop him. I'm going to do this with judges. Like, they did everything they could to undermine the Barack Obama presidency and the Democratic agenda. It's insane for Democrats just to be unilaterally disarming at this point.
I totally agree. I'll give you a specific... a hypothetical I'd like you to answer. This is one that I constantly go to because to me it's a litmus test that I try to ask more and more politicians when I interview them as well. Let's say that we get a miracle in 2026 and we flip the Senate for the Democrats. Very unlikely, but let's just assume it. Trump remains president. We have a Democratic Senate. There is a Supreme Court vacancy in the 3rd year of Trump's presidency. Do you think Democrats should grant the vacancy? I have an answer for this. I'm curious what you say.
You think Democrats should what? Should allow Trump
to fill the vacancy in his 3rd year in office?
No.
Love it. So many people hesitate to give that answer, and I'm like, why? Why is the answer not no? Of course not. We don't permit that. There's still so many people, unfortunately, who are like, well, it's his 3rd year. Maybe if it were an election year, then we could play by the McConnell rules. I mean,
if Democrats control the Senate right now and there was a vacancy, I would say no. I don't give a shit about any talk of mandate. They don't care about mandates. There's got to be... Look, you cannot play... The only analogy I can give is the Democrats are they're playing football or soccer, as I would say. They're playing football, what you guys call soccer. Well, I am American, but when it comes to sport, I take my American hat off, put my British one on and say it's football. But football, soccer, whatever you want to call it, it's like being on the pitch. And the Democrats are playing the Republicans, and the Republicans just casually pick up the ball and run with it every few minutes. And the Democrats are like, well, we can't do that because that's against the rules. At some point, the Democrats also have to pick up the ball and run with it, or you will keep losing. So if the other side has burned down the rules and the norms, you can mourn for those rules and norms, or you just adapt and do what the other side's doing in order to win. The problem is Democrats aren't interested in winning. That's what's become clear.
Yeah, one of the things that I know you've been wrestling with since Biden and Kamala Harris's defeat was whether or not Democrats will take the wrong lesson from the election. That's something that I've been wrestling with in my content as well. Given that, at least with respect to domestic policy, Biden was the least neoliberal president and the most progressive president in modern history. Are you concerned that the next candidate, whoever that candidate may be, will run back towards neoliberalism.
Yes, they will, and that's what I've always been worried about. When I spoke to a lot of Muslim and Arab American crowds last year about the election, a lot of them were very upset about Gaza, understandably so, and saying, look, if we defeat the Democrats this time, yes, short-term pain from Trump, but they will learn a lesson that they can't just ignore the left, they can't ignore progressives, they can't be this bad on foreign policy. And I always try to say to them, wake up. That's not how the world works. Every time the Democrats lose, they don't shift left, they shift right. In 2016, when Hillary lost, the Democrats did not wake up and go, damn it, we should have picked Bernie. We made a mistake. No, they blamed Bernie for losing. And they blamed Russia for the entire loss rather than look at internally what they got wrong. And then when 2020 came along, they went for the most centrist candidate possible, Joe Biden, and didn't go for Bernie a second time round. And again, now in 2024, they did not wake up since the election and say, oh, wow, we got it wrong on Gaza. We got it wrong on multiple other issues. No, in fact, you're now seeing a great pressure now to say, well, it was the left's fault and Biden was seen as too left-wing and Kamala Harris was too woke and it was the ads on trans that killed all that stuff. And yet that is going to be the post-mortem that a lot of the strategists take. Half these Democratic Party strategists have no idea what they're talking about, are just pushing the agenda of corporate and 0.1% interests. What's really interesting is that some people are belatedly, and I think Chris Murphy's transformation since the election is interesting because he is now just pushing Bernie Sanders' talking points, which is great. And he was identified with a more centrist part of the party. But what's interesting is what people are understanding, I hope, is that it's never been about policy anyways, right? People don't vote for Donald Trump because they think he's got the best healthcare policy. They vote for Donald Trump because they think he's going to burn the system down. He's going to take on their enemies. He's going to be anti-establishment. He'll drain the swamp hilariously. All of this nonsense, right? It is about a tone, a mood, an attitude, an approach. That is what Democrats are lacking. They've put, two of their last three candidates, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, didn't really stand for anything clear, right? They weren't really picking a fight with anyone. Harris kind of started off, and then there's reporting that her brother-in-law from Uber kind of pulled her back from going after big pharma and big tech and big money.
And they muzzled Tim Walz, too. As a consequence, they muzzled
Tim Walz, who was out there really calling out the Republicans and special interests. You really need someone who's going to go out there and just, what the Republicans have mastered is picking enemies, right? Saying we are going to go after Mexicans, migrants, Muslims, transgender kids, woke folks, etc. Democrats don't really have that, right? I don't agree with the Republican enemies, obviously, but I think they're right to pick an enemy and have a fight. And the Democrats aren't doing that. We have a country where Americans, rightly or wrongly, are deeply disillusioned with the media, with governance, with the economy. Even when the economy is doing well, they think it's doing badly. They feel they're being left behind. They feel they're being screwed over. This is also a global trend across the world. Anti-incumbency politics is at its highest. I think it's partly a leftover of the financial crisis that was never resolved, partly a fallout, I still think, from the Iraq War. I go back 20 years, which is a major rupture of trust in the media. And of course, COVID, right? We don't talk about the pandemic and what it did to people. There's a lot of anger out there, and you need a candidate who's going to ride that wave of anger. The Republicans keep putting one up. The Democrats do not.
So I want to be respectful of your time. I've got one last big question for you and just a couple of rapid fire ones. But obviously, I've said before in our last conversation, you and Waj and others, like, you walk a tightrope because you're simultaneously defending the Democrats' legitimate domestic accomplishments while also criticizing the Biden-Harris administration for their stance on foreign policy, particularly Gaza. You were also very clear that you felt that the Trump administration would be worse. So can we talk about where you stand now on that, given what Trump has announced, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, but he seems to be walking it back, then he doubles down on it. Where are you with this situation? How are you doing right now?
It's a good question. A few days after the new year, I had a lot of people in my timeline and replies on various social media. You should apologize. You were wrong. You said Trump would be worse for Gaza, but he's better. He got a ceasefire. And I was like, really? Do you really want to go down that road? You're really putting your faith in Donald Trump? One thing I know in life is anyone who puts their faith in Donald Trump ends up being disappointed. And I said, look, if in a year or 2 years' time, the Middle East is a better place, Palestinians are in a better place, then yeah, I will be the first to hold my hand. I got it wrong. Trump actually was better for the Middle East than the Democrats. I will be the first to happily do that. I hope I'm wrong. But we are a month into this administration. As you say, he's saying and doing crazy stuff every day. And by the way, people say, I've got some friends of mine who are like, no, come on. He just says ethnically, and you can't take him literally, Mehdi. He just says this stuff. I'm like, okay, forget what he says. What has he done? He released the one good thing that Joe Biden did in the midst of all the horrible support he gave to Netanyahu is he suspended the 2,000-pound bombs, the bombs that wipe out entire football fields of people. Trump immediately released it. When he was asked why he's releasing it to Israel, he said, well, they're paid for it because that's the world he lives in, transactional. So look, there is no doubt in my mind currently that he is worse for the world. He's worse for Palestinians. He's worse for Muslims at home. He's worse across the board. Do I want to be vindicated in a year's time? No, but let's talk in a year's time. I think it's way too early. What I can say is that he has 100% killed innocent people around the world already with his USAID cuts. We know that. We know that literally children have been turned away from hospitals, treatments have been cut off overnight. And I don't know how many because no one's really done the investigative reporting, but we're going to find out how many people have died since January the 20th.
So I guess my last question on that particular subject is to people say, okay, he just talks shit. I would argue a president's rhetoric matters. I'm just old fashioned that way. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But to people say the ethnic cleansing won't actually manifest. He's just using it as a threat or shock value. Have you ruled that out? Or do you think that a Trump inspired ethnic cleansing?
This is what Israel's always wanted, and they have a president now who'll give them whatever they want. I actually even more worrying than the ethnic cleansing is this idea that U.S. intel, according to the Washington Post, thinks this is the year Netanyahu's finally going to do what he's always dreamt of doing, which is a full-on attack on Iran, and that Trump will let him do it, and maybe even join in from a U.S. president. That God forbid would take us much closer to World War III than anything else that we've seen in recent years. So there's a lot of fronts on which him being there as this reckless, erratic, easily manipulated president causes a lot of issues on the global stage. I just agreed to do a debate in July in the UK with Michael Gove, the former British cabinet minister, on whether Trump 2.0 is making the world a safer place. And I just thought to myself, there's no point even trying to write a speech right now because we're going to be forget July. We'll be in a different place globally in March, in April. Who knows where we'll be in July?
So then my last serious question is, you've always described yourself as an optimist. I am by definition a cynic.
No, I'm not an optimist.
You're not.
I'm a pessimist.
Oh,
I'm someone who has hope, right? As a man of faith, I keep hope. But optimism and hope are two very different things. I'm very pessimistic about the future. I think things are going to get much worse before they get
okay. Better. That's important because I listened to several. I basically listen to every interview you do, and I guess I conflated these two. So I'm curious how.
No, I'm always keen to separate them out.
Yeah,
you can be very pessimistic, but still have hope in your fellow human beings that they will do the right thing eventually.
Well, then it sounds like we are kindred spirits in that regard too. So there's really nothing to ask. I guess a very rapid fire question is: are you looking forward to Andor season 2?
When's it out?
I think it's coming out this year. If I'm not mistaken,
Fantastic.
It's like July. Yeah,
I loved it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, Mehdi, listen, I appreciate this. I'm so really impressed with what Zeteo has done in such a short amount of time. You guys are skyrocketing. I hope people continue to follow in that model, and that you guys continue to do additional content. The America Unfiltered, or the America Unhinged with Waj and Fran was just a great idea.
That's Tuesdays and Thursdays. Let me do a shameless plug, 8 p.m. live YouTube show that we just launched. Thank you so much for your support for that, and congratulations to you on all your successes.
I appreciate that. Do you have anything to tease for the future as far as Zeteo is concerned?
We just launched a new YouTube show. It's not out yet. We just dropped the trailer this week, which is Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman, former Democratic members of Congress, are going to be doing a monthly show, really kind of lifting the veil on what goes on in Congress.
Perfect. Well, I'll be looking forward to that. Mehdi, thank you so much. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.